Hello everybody, welcome to another CodeTrain PD video. This time we are doing a model lesson used to help supplement our in-person PD or our online PD of course. And today we're going to do a lesson from our year one teaching package. So if you're kind of new to our resources, we have a few different packages. This is from our year one lesson plan doc, and then we're going to be taking something from our first unit. And if you haven't seen this before, each of our unit has introductions, has links to our full teaching examples, our folders and activities for you and your students to do, and of course all the other resources. In today's lesson, we're going to do is lesson 7, or at least we're going to do a healthy chunk of lesson 7, focusing on images as well as introduce you to fonts. This lesson is also sort of a bit of a pivotal lesson. In the fact that it's the first one that I use Replit. So up until this point in time, I usually introduce my students to the beginnings of code using p5.js's online editor. I do that because it's nice and simple and clean for students to use. But right now that we're about to start adding images, I want them to be able to have a good folder structure and be able to add in bigger and bigger projects. So we're transitioning over, and I'm going to show you what my Replit looks like that I provide to students, and a little bit about how that works. And you'll have to join us for more of our PD to learn a little bit more about how I use Replit in the classroom. But this at least give you a little bit of a heads up. So it's kind of a nice, great lesson to kind of introduce you to sort of my style and my format and how these lessons kind of work. So we're on lesson 7. Students by this point in time have been working with the basic variables and basic graphics, and what we're now going to do is move into images. And so as part of images, I like to talk about image formats. I like to do a little bit of a talk about compression, because that's what those image formats essentially are, JPEGs and GIFs, etc. And then I like to kind of remind students about the different kinds of data. So you'll see there's a little mini lesson on data types, so I'll at least give you a bit of a heads up on how I do it. But what we're going to focus mostly on is an example on how to use fonts and images. Now, if you've looked at one of our bootcamp videos that I recorded a couple years ago, since then I've kind of evolved a little bit of the way that I do images and fonts. In both cases, there's, I would say, 2 major ways you can work with images and work with fonts. So in this lesson, you'll see sort of my most modern, most current version anyway about that. And we'll kind of walk you through the lesson that is provided here, and you'll see sort of the way that I do with my students. And you're welcome to follow along in Replit if you like. If I remember, I'll put the little link to my beginning package in the comments, so you can actually follow along with the various images, or you can just find your own. I'm only going to do 1 or 2. It's not too hard to save and upload once you understand the process. So here we go. So first of all, I always like to start off with a video about different types of images and image formats. And so there's one here that is pretty good. There's a couple other ones kind of embedded in lessons in and around this. But usually what I like to do is after this, I like to talk to the students a little bit about image compression. So what I'll often do is talk about JPEGs versus GIFs and other kinds of things and how they work. And I'll usually kind of ask someone in the room who has sort of like a solid color, maybe a black hoodie on, and I'll ask that student to just stand up, and then I'll ask somebody else in the room, what color is the hoodie? And of course they'll say black, and I'll say, well, sort of, but not according to the computer. The computer is going to actually identify probably 30 to 40 to 50 different shades of gray in that hoodie. And I'll say, if we all look a little bit more closely, you'll notice that where the fold of the shoulder is or where the elbow is, you're going to actually see many different shades of gray or shades of black, if you prefer. And so the computer will actually pick up every one of those. And as a reminder, everybody, the students, that when you take a picture, at first, in what they call the raw format, the computer is going to remember every single pixel color in an RGB format. So every single pixel, if it's pure black, it's going to be 0, 0, 0, 0 red, 0 blue, 0 RGB, 0 green, and 0 blue. And of course, we've talked about RGB colors already leading into this lesson. And but reality is, like I said, there's many different shades of gray leading to that 0, 0 black. And so what we'll actually talk about is the way that images work to compress. So a JPEG, for example, says, the human eye can't really pick up and certainly not in an image. We don't need on a computer screen. We don't need to pick up every one of those subtle image colors, which one pixel might have one red value less than the one beside it. So instead, what we do is we eliminate and kind of combine blocks of color, and that allows us to compress those images. So I usually kind of talk to students a lot about these kinds of things, and if you have a bit more of a background on it, it's easier for you to have those discussions. So if you haven't, if you're not kind of familiar with it, I encourage you to kind of maybe find a couple more background videos that makes you a little more comfortable with the concept, so you can kind of talk kids through it a little bit more. Just makes the lesson a little bit more interesting, and talks a little more about the science. So once I kind of talk about the images, I talk about, let's see how it relates to our code. And so I always go back to a lesson that I've likely done with them already, and that is I like to talk to them about different types of data very early on. And when I talk about different types of data, I will write up these various what I sort of refer to as the big 5 data types, and I'll do that even earlier and expose them to it even before we've actually used them. So I'll talk about, would have already talked about using integers, whole numbers, and floating point numbers. Maybe at this point in time we may not have done much with floating point numbers, but at least they've been exposed. It's not a hard concept to understand. Integers are whole numbers, floating point numbers are decimals. They all inherently know that by the time they reach high school. We talked about strings, and we've seen that a little bit already, but not that much. For largely for words. Again, in the early days, you use simplistic language to let them know. Characters and Boolean. We haven't really used Boolean yet, but Boolean is coming. I let them know that that's a variable that's going to store just a true false. It's going to be really useful later on. And today we're going to add and talk about images. And so whenever I talk to students about this, I always do the same thing on the whiteboard. I will draw something that looks like this on the whiteboard, and I'll say this is memory. This is your RAM memory. And so what I like to tell them all the time is memory is just a cupboard full of shelves. And so whenever we create a variable, let's say I say let. I use the word let a lot. Let's say I wanted to do I wanted to say age is what I meant to spell here. That was you can ignore my little spelling here. And I said I want to put the age 16 in this. Essentially, what we're doing is we are nicknaming a shelf age. And so this shelf address from now on is going to always be found using the word age. And so if we ever want to look up an age, we can grab age. If we ever want to add to age, we can add to age, and it'll take 16 and add whatever you want to add to it. And so I use this all the time over and over again with students to kind of get them thinking about the way that things are happening in the background. Today, the new image or the new variable type we're going to do is image, and so it takes a lot more memory to store an image in all its pixels than it does to store the number 16. So we get students to start thinking about memory size and image data types and things like that. It just kind of is a nice, every time I introduce something new, I always kind of come back to this and kind of let them know how it plays out in memory. And so now, once we've kind of done that, we're ready for our lesson. So I'm going to pause the video for a moment. I'm going to switch over to Replit, letting you know where we're at, and I'll show you what I provide with them, and then we'll get started on our actual coding lesson. Just bear with me a minute. All right. So before I get right into the actual coding lesson for the day, I wanted to kind of show you a little bit about what sort of how I set up the Replit. Again, I go into much more detail on this in other videos and in other lessons in our PD. But essentially, what happens is I use what's called the Replit Teams product. And Teams is a free product from Replit, and what it allows me to do is create a team for my class. So here is I've one computer science 10 class, year 1 class this year, and what I do throughout the course of the year is I add what they call a Replit, or I usually just refer to as a project. So one project per unit. And so these right now, this is towards the end of the unit, you can see, but you'll see there's actually sort of 5 of the units that I've kind of are projects I've used, including there's an exam one that I've used at one point in time. And I thought I'd show you this just from this is the student's perspective. So I've created a project for them at the start of this unit that has some code in it. And this would be what they would see the very, very first day they go into it. And so this is literally the first day that I'm exposing them to Replit. And so I have a link that I provide them. We get them hooked up with Replit. They join the team through a link I provide them. And then they end up getting to this page where they'll see, in this case, this one project name. And this project name, Structured Programming 1, is what we call this credit in Alberta, this unit in Alberta. So you can ignore that for a sec. So I'm going to click Start Project so you can see exactly what it looks like for my students. I'm going to Yeah, I'll do that right now for you. So students would see this exact view. So once they start, they have this in front of them. And then what I do is I talk to them a little bit about how this works. And so again, I'm going to decide to show you a little bit what this is. And so this is the exact project that this year's current students saw. So what had happened is, up until now, we had done a lot of different examples using the P5 editor. So what I did is I've copied all of those files, or many of those files. You can see 0, 1, 2, 6, 7, and up until 8 into this project to start with. And then 9 is one that we're going to do together. So sometimes I give them a little bit of start code, sometimes I do it at the beginning, but because it's the first time they've used Replit, I thought I'd show them this. And so what I would have the students do, I probably wouldn't have had EX6 up. I might have had EX0 welcome up like this, and I run it. And so what you can't see if you're not familiar is I'm doing control / in the background. So this has a little bit of information about, what does an IDE stand for, and we talk about that a little bit, and then I let them know here is the process for changing files. And so what I'm going to do, the last one we would have done before this was EX8. So I say I want you to click in this line EX8. Actually, I say first of all, I want you to click in whatever one is highlighted or colored, EX0 welcome, and control / or if you're in a Mac, command / that comments it in and out. And this is what a comment looks like in HTML, which is the file that runs JavaScript. And so they've been exposed to this a little bit. This isn't completely foreign at this point in time, but it allows us to kind of quickly follow through. And the idea is every time we create a new file, we add a new line by copying and paste the old one, control / out the old one, and start working on a new one. So here's the current state of the new one. And when it runs, you will see there is almost nothing in there. And so what I've done, though, is I've given them the shell of that file. And in fact, I haven't even given that shell of that file. So we're going to create this right now. And so we're going to create this file right now and do our first images and fonts example with you. The other thing we're going to look at here is I've also provided a series of images ahead of time. So when I'm first learning, I don't want them to have to fight through and go look for a bunch of images, because that wastes a lot of time. We do that for sure. I give them lots of chance to do it, but I've got some different images here that hopefully Replit's not going to be too slow on me when I pop up. Some guinea pig, something I'm going to use an on and off image in a second. There is the happy face, which is used on that on the first welcome image as well. And so these images are pre-made, which means we're going to be able to use them today to create a little birthday cake message. So you can see I've got a little cake and a couple other things, and maybe I'll use the happy face again as part of our example for today. And so there is some images pre-done. I said today we're going to just use these images they're already there, and then obviously I'm going to show you how to save some in the future. And for you teachers who've never done it before, all you have to do, using whatever, Google Images or whatever, what I get my students to do is save them, give them a nice simple name, and then once they're saved, they literally just have to drag them up into this folder, and now they're available to us. And I'm going to show you how to use them here in just a second. Okay, so now let's create this file. So I'm going to start over here in the new file button on the left, and I'm going to say ex9_images.js. Now I wanted to have that exact same name in index already, just to give students the kind of the exposure and how this has to be done, or you can just type it out with them the first time as well. Can't remember exactly why I decided to do it this way in this particular example. Like I said, I'm showing you my actual live project from this year, so you sort of see what it looks like and you can see the process. So I've created this new file now, ex9 images, and what you'll also see is I have this folder called the template. And so I have got in this template a few different things that I'm going to have them grab at various points in time. And for now, what I'm going to actually get them to grab is from the template file, function preload, which I've never seen before, function setup, which they have, and function draw, which they also have. So I'm going to copy that into my images folder, and then I tell them right away to change the background color. Let's see what the background color actually turns out to be. Since it's dark gray, but I said we're going to do a birthday card today. We're going to do a nice happy card. Maybe it's Mother's Day coming up. Maybe they have they want to do something for a Halloween party, whatever. Anything they want to do. Maybe got a birthday of a younger brother or sister, whatever we're going to do. So, but we definitely don't want a gray. That's kind of lame. So maybe I'll just go like a kind of a darker red or purple or something like that. Let's see. Just pick kind of a random color there. And there we go. That's a nice color for our thing. Now, when you're working in Replit, depending on the size of your screen, you may or may not, in your resolution, may or may not have your whole screen in place at the same time. I'm not going to go too much into how Replit works today, but that gives us at least a decent size to work with. Now, you will also see that what I've done is so first of all, actually, sorry, I should back up. Setup and draw are almost identical to how we use in P5.js. The only difference essentially is these two lines in setup look a little bit different. So in the original P5.js, it just says create canvas. What I've done is I've created this extra line called let sketch and sketch.parent my canvas. Now, it's worth showing you right now. Again, this is sort of just the way I've kind of decided to do it over time. If I go back to index again, I give them this to begin with, you'll see there is a div called my canvas. If you don't know much about HTML, you don't need to worry about it too much. You can copy this exactly. Essentially, this is just setting up an area that called my canvas, and then my template just asks people to always use my canvas. And then otherwise it's the same as what they've seen before, and you've seen lots. Background works the same, everything else works the same. So the only thing that's new is this function preload. And so what I said is when you're working with web design based projects, you want your project to run as smoothly as possible. And so if you have complicated images, or we just kind of get in this practice of doing it anyway, if you don't have complicated images, what you want to do is preload them all. So the idea of preload is it runs before setup. So it gets everything kind of ready to rock. And I put a comment in here that's going to help us out. And in fact, this exact comment is ready to go, and we're going to be able to use it right away. But what it does do is it kind of gives students something to copy and paste in future templates. They always have a reference to how it starts to look like. And so what we do, though, is we need to start by putting our image in. And so pick1 is a variable. And so we need to create our shelf in memory called pick1. So we're going to say let pick1. And that's all we're going to do in this to start with. We'll add more a little bit later on, but let pick1 names a shelf in memory. And then this line, and we can control / in those comments now, says let's go put something into the memory slot, in the shelf in memory. And if you actually go look at my lesson plan, I'm going to skip over this with you guys, but if I go back to my lesson plan, what you'll actually see is sometimes I'll copy and paste this into a Google Stream, or sometimes I'll just have them type it out. That I talk about there being 3 steps, make it a little bit bigger for you, to getting the image ready. One is to save the image off the internet, most likely, upload into Replit, and then you write your 3 lines of code. Set up variables to hold images, load the images in the variables, and draw the screen. So 3 lines. Set up the variable, load the image, draw the image. So set up the variable, let pick1. If we know we're going to have more than one pick, we might want to get a better name, so I think I will. I think, in fact, I'm going to use Replit's little tool here. I'm going to right-click it and say rename all occurrences, and I'm going to call it, maybe I'll call it cake pick. Give it a kind of a better name, so in the future we can recognize the difference between our images. So cake pick equals, and then this line will be new, but it's not hard to really understand. Load image, capital I, go and find it. So where do we have the cake.jpg picture? We have it stored in an images subfolder, and there's cake.jpg. Capitalization does matter, so you need to make sure that you do that properly. Spacing does matter, you gotta make sure you do that properly. I usually like to get students to run it right now and turn on the console with this little wrench, because if not, it'll give you an error right now if you've made a mistake. If you misspelled it and run it again, you'll get a couple different potential things. You'll probably get stuck in this loading error, and you get a kind of a weird error event is trusted as true, but somewhere it'll also say I had trouble loading your image. So that's kind of your hint that you've broken something on your images right from the beginning. And that's before we've even tried to draw it, right? We just haven't been able to load it. So I usually like to get students to hit run at load. And now, here's how we draw our image. The word image, an X and Y coordinate, which they're familiar with now. I'm going to say, let's see, my screen is 800. Let's go 200, comma, let's go 200, comma, 100. Let's go 200, comma, 200, just to show you. And in front of that, we write the name of the variable, cake, pick, comma, 200, comma, 200. I like to put my semicolons on, even though they're not required in JavaScript, and then we run it, And ta-da, we got our image. But oh, that image turned out really big and not really in the right location. So first of all, I'm going to move it back a little bit. So maybe I'll go, I don't mind 200 down because I can put like happy birthday message up top, but I definitely want to move it over. So maybe I'll move it over at 100x instead. And I want it to kind of fit nicely in the middle of my screen, but you'll see that the image is still, oh, actually this one turned out to be decently sized as far as the image goes. It looks like it's a little bit too tall. So when you do images, there's sort of two kind of options of how you do images. I'll make my screen a little bit bigger, you can see a little more. Is if you just put one set of numbers, x and y, it'll give you just the x location and y location, or you can put two sets of numbers. So cake pick, comma 100, comma 200, and now you can give it a width and a height. So maybe you want it to only be quite a bit smaller, and maybe you say you want it to be just 300, comma 200 in height. And now we can run it, and it will put your image on at the right size that you want. Now I've got them both on the screen, so then comment out the other one, and ta-da, there we go, a nice little image, the way it works. And so that is images in a nutshell, right? It's really quite simple. Once you got the image saved, once you got it dragged up into your folder here, generate a variable, load the image into the variable, draw the variable wherever you want. Okay, x and y, or xy width height is the number of pixels. Okay, there's images. I also want to show you in this lesson fonts. So I'm going to pause the video for just a second and prepare with another website that I want to demonstrate for you. Okay, so we're going to do fonts. Again, depending on what you've seen in the past, there's a couple different ways to do fonts, just like there's a couple different ways to do images. One of the ways to do fonts is actually have a font pre-saved and uploaded into your project, just kind of like you upload images. And then you have to have a series of things like this where you create a variable and preload the variable, so you preload the font in. But I've gone away from that process, and I've used what's called a Google font. And I'll show you how I used it already in the project that's already here, and then I'll demonstrate exactly how we go and do it in a second. So the line on welcome, or the document on welcome, has the font line in here, and it simply says text font audio wide. That's all you have to do as long as you've got audio wide loaded into your project. So audio wide is what they call a Google font. So it's a font that's kind of built into Chrome. It'll often work on other browsers as well, but for sure it'll work it'll work in almost any browser, but for sure it'll work in Chrome browsers exactly. So that's the line to draw text font audio wide. And in case you're not familiar, here is the other three actually these are kind of the big settings for text, and I'll actually talk about sort of the big settings, big five settings. The font, the size, text align is sometimes important, sometimes not. No stroke and fill. I usually turn stroke off because text will have a stroke, and if you have a really, really big font and you end up having a different fill and a different stroke color, your text can look sometimes really cool and sometimes really, really awful. So usually what I tell students to do, first of all, like the big three is size, no stroke, and fill, and then if you want to add a font, here's how we do it. The first thing you have to know is how to get this font audio wide into your project. And that actually happens not in this JavaScript file. It happens in the index.html files. It's an HTML based line of code. So I'm going to click back to my HTML line of code, and I'm going to make this font a little bit bigger for the rest of this thing. Hopefully you guys have been able to see it's probably a little small all along. But I'll leave it the way it is right now. What you'll see is there is these two lines right here. Link href, and then a long link to the Google APIs, and then this one says Aladdin and this one says audio wide. So let me show you where I find this and how you can add one for yourself. In the lesson plan package on lesson 7, here is a link to the website I like to use to get all these. It's called How to Google Fonts. It's part of the W3 School website that I use a lot. So I'm going to click to How to Use Google Fonts, and you'll see what's here. It takes a few seconds to load because there's 1,000 fonts it's going to load up. And so what we do is I tell students that this is how you can find something really, really cool. And so we just need to find something we like, and of course because there's 1,000 and it auto-populates, it does take a little bit longer to scroll down. But I think what I'll do is I'll just kind of jump down to something kind of at random here. about halfway down, give it a sec to load up. So I'm in the L's. Okay, so let's say I want to use luxurious script. It sounds fancy. If it's for my birthday party, so maybe it's not quite as fun as some others. Oh, here, luckiest guy. I've used luckiest guy before. This is good. Let's do luckiest guy. Oh, loved by the king. It's kind of fun for a birthday, but if I make it a card and I want something nice and bold, so luckiest guy. Now, here's how I do it. You click on this, try it yourself. Now, we'll see how this populates in a sec. I'm gonna pause the video while the website catches up. Just a second. Okay, so all I've done is I've clicked on try it yourself and it opened up this window. And so this is sort of a demo of what the font looks like. And so you got to tell students, if they've never used fonts before, oh, it looks like this one doesn't have lowercase letters. That's fine, whatever. Just got to be aware of that. But this is all you need. This is all you need. Here's the line here, link href. Now what you want to point out to students first time you do it is if they haven't done any web design before, which mine hadn't to this point, there's something called the header section of your HTML file. So we just got to make sure that when we grab this, we grab the complete line. Make sure you grab that opening angle bracket. Make sure you grab the closing angle bracket. Looks like a greater than sign and nothing else. And I'm going to Control C, copy that. Then I switch to Replit and I go into my index. Now because I've included some, it's kind of obvious where to go. In fact, I've said put a comma to your place links here. And you just got to say when you're doing this, make sure you're pasting on a whole new line. Make sure it's nice and clear. Looks like it comes in. Make sure you got your opening angle bracket. Make sure you got your closing angle bracket. And I always like to hit my little format button lots with my students right away, just to kind of make sure everything kind of indents nicely. And now I should have access to luckiest guy. So let's go have a look at this. So what I want to say is happy birthday, mom. Happy birthday, mom. Okay, so I'll start with the simplest text line, and I'll add the features above it just in case you've never been exposed. It's going to be above image, but just because I didn't doing it second, I'm going to put it afterwards. So first thing is we say text. So to do text, you say what it is you want to say. Happy birthday, mom. Then you give it an X and a Y coordinate. That's it. So now I'm a lot taller up. Maybe I'll say 100, comma 20. So we get it on the screen. The default setting will be whatever the current fill color is, and the default fill color is black. Now you notice it says 120, and it's over by 100. 20 is not very long. In fact, in kind of just in the flow of things, I kind of done opposite. This picture is at 100, 200. So just to show you how the text lines up, if I make this 100, 200 as well. So notice cake picture is 100, 200. So that's this exact dot. Now I'm going to draw text at the exact same point. Boom, it's there. Now notice you can see it. Oh, you're not going to be able to see it on the thing. That's great. Let's give it some size right away so we can see it better, and then this will demonstrate a little better. First, I'll go text size. I'll make it nice and big because this is the the big message. So text 40. Now you can start to see it. I'm sure you couldn't see it on the screen at first. And so what you'll notice is that it is going upwards. So 100, 200 is this dot for the picture, and so 100, 200 text goes up. So you do have to keep that in mind when you are using it. If you are using text align, this 100, 200 is defaulted to a left line, right? So at 100, 200, the text starts there and goes that way. There are different types of text alignment. So maybe I'll just do it above it, text align, just again to demonstrate this for you because some of you are seeing this for the first time. Text align center is the line. Run, and you'll see now that it centers at 100, 200. And again, so that's not really what we want, but I don't necessarily mind that. Maybe I'll just kind of I'll move it over again just for demonstration purposes, and I'll move it up like I wanted. So now I want this to be maybe if this is 200 down, maybe I want this at about 100. And I don't want it to center here. I want it to be centered somewhere over here. Maybe I'll center it at about 300. Again, I'm not going to be too worried about the look of it yet. Okay, now we got some text on the screen. It's not looking great just for simplicity, but that's okay. Then I'm going to say no stroke. Again, that just makes sure there's no lines on the outside of my text. And then I'll do fill, and let's go with maybe a yellow. Nice and bright for my birthday. And finally, The last thing I want to show you in this lesson, of course, is the font. And now that I've added that luckiest guy font, so all I have to do is go back to my index, make sure I pay attention to how it's spelt and how it looks. So it's the word luckiest space guy. Luckiest space guy. So that's what I want. Capitalization shouldn't matter. We'll check in a second. Maybe I'll test it just to demonstrate. It's a luckiest space guy. Because it is a space, it'll need to be in quotes. It is a string. It's a string anyway, actually. So it's going to be text font, capital F, luckiest. Oh, I said I was going to test it with lowercase first, but I'll do it in reverse. And we run our font, and boom. Now we've got our font on the screen. Just to double check, I believe that the actual font is not case sensitive, but we'll find out in a second. Yeah, correct. But the code always is. So there we go. There is your crash course on images and fonts. Now, if I'm continuing this lesson, so that this has been quite a long, we're already over a half hour, that's which is fine for our PD. What I will do is I usually add multiple images, I use multiple fonts with this, or I provide them a lot of the code for the first one and move on to a second image. So in this particular lesson, I've kind of done this with only one or two images, but I've also suggested we start moving on, bulb off. And that really depends on how your students are reacting. There is not a lot of code in this one to do, but what it does is introduce them to the idea of a Boolean variable and an if-else statement that can switch. I'm not going to show you that lesson today, but it could be really good lesson here. Depending on how much of this background information you've done, you may or may not get to it in your if you have an 8-minute class or not. Quite often I'll push it back to the next one as sort of a review with some new stuff in it, which is kind of cool. So it's basically the same process though. We created a variable called bulb on, bulb off, load two different images, which I've pre-included in my project already. So it's the exact same image, just one is with the light off and one is the light on. And we talk about, for the first time, using a Boolean variable. And usually this is an exposure that they haven't seen before. So I say if it's on, we're going to draw this image. If it's off, we're going to draw this image. And then in my key presses, I do a couple things to just change I think I do L and D, light and dark, but I think originally, or sometimes I just do mouse pressed. If it's on, we turn it off. If it's else, we turn it back on. And so it's kind of a fun little kind of example that takes this images, but actually gives it into something that they can actually interact with. So it's kind of fun. Okay, so there we go, everybody. Hopefully that gives you an idea of how things go. So some of the big pictures are, as you can see, I always or often supplement my coding lessons with some theory. In this case, there was quite a bit, especially if you're introducing Replit to it. So if you are introducing Replit on this exact lesson, you're probably not getting everything done. Usually what I'll do is I'll kind of pre-introduce them to the lesson before, but it's right around this point in time. And because many of my teachers, by the time they see this current video, may not have seen how I use Replit in Teams exactly, I thought I would kind of do that as well. So it kind of makes it last a little bit longer. But I always will give them an introduction to how images work. I'll always, whenever I introduce a new variable, in this case the images variable, talk and remind them about the shelves in memory, and then we'll get into the code. Okay, hopefully that helps you understand. Again, that's lesson 7 in our CodeTrain package. If you haven't seen it before, check it out, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.